I know we were kind of heading in this direction anyway, so I'll just throw it out as a factor in all of this conversation is the Ohio State opening.
That was the next question. Yes.
Does Michigan open? We keep hearing people keep throwing in Indiana. I love Woodson, so I don't know. We'll see how that goes. But look, all of these
I'll
things
say
on the
this on
landscape.
Woodson. Like I don't just very quickly. I would be stunned. I know you have more inside info and all that stuff than I do, but I would be stunned after the fact that they hadn't made the tournament in 6 years. They make it year one. Last year, they
Mhm.
finished second in the Big Ten, have
Yeah, they're
the runner
great.
up for player of the year in Trace Jackson Davis. They're a 4 seed, the round of 32. That would take a lot. I know it's been an absolute train wreck this season so far, but it would be quite the move for a program that's been traditionally a lot more patient with their coaches,
Yes.
with Archie
Yeah.
Miller and Tom
Yep.
Crean, than like a Louisville has been, for better or for worse, on that standpoint, to where just the outside influences and kind of reading it from that perspective, as someone who, obviously went to school there and follows them very closely, I would be pretty stunned if they moved on Woodson. But that
Yeah.
would,
Well,
maybe,
that's I think our colleague Jeff Goodman has said if anything were to happen there, it would be Woodson deciding that he doesn't want to coach anymore
right.
versus the school move. And because I agree with everything there, and I honestly don't think that would be a wise move unless you're confident you can literally go get the pie in the sky
Well,
candidate.
they
You
would go
know,
get Dusty Mays, I think, is what they would do. Former
maybe, yeah.
night
So
manager. It just,
yeah,
that just makes sense.
right. So there's factors there that are always going to be weighed on by ads and people around the ads, boosters, and all that stuff. So the reason I mentioned any of those other potential places is just because they're great jobs and there's a lot of resources in those jobs and there's people who are willing to pay big money for good coaches to go get those jobs. And so as you're trying to jostle for position, it's like those old rebounding drills, and I know teams still do it. You put the bubble on the basket, you can't leave the paint, and you knock the crap out of each other. That's what the coaching carousel is going to be. They're going to knock the crap out of each other, and you got to find someone who's a fit. I think for Louisville, I think you could go two routes with how to fill this job. And I think both of them, from a characteristic standpoint, is where I'm going with this. I think both of these characteristics could work at Louisville. I think you either need to get a guy who is a head down, X's and O's guy who is still, good in media and stuff, but really is going to prove folks, hey, the X's and O's in this team they're going to play hard. They're going to be a good, solid team, and that's where like a Dusty May comes into play. Is he's a guy he's not some big brash, personality. He's not going to blow you away with, with big statements and press conferences and stuff like that. But he's going to get good players. He's a big evaluator, and I would encourage people who are interested in learning about all these coaches. There's almost always going to be a really good profile of them in the Athletic. But my buddy CJ Moore wrote a really good profile of Dusty May last year before FAU went on that Final Four run. That really gave an insight into how he operates and how he thinks and how he's built a team. But then you get into that characteristic of, like we were talking about earlier, the headstrong, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what's going on around us. We're going to win. I'm going to be out there. I'm going to be confident in what I'm doing. And there's like 10 guys so I can think of who I think would fit that bill. We mentioned Musselman. I think Jerome Tang probably fits into that category. I think Mick Cronin, when things are going really well, has a swagger about him. But again, as you mentioned, that might be an expensive situation there. I really, truly don't understand that how that would all work and if it's truly as expensive as it's being made out to be. Um, but yeah, you just keep going down that list of guys who, a Nate Oates, for example. I don't think Nate Oates is going to be on the radar for Louisville because, again, the price tag is significant. But I use him as an example. He's brash. He's confident. His teams play a very specific style. They're good. They're fun to watch. Bruce Pearl is in that same category. Very specific roster building style. They play a certain style. They're fun to watch. They're good teams. And he's out there and he's confident in his guys and what they're doing. And so I think you could go in either of those directions for a characteristic profile. But I think, you know, to get the juice back a little bit, I kind of lean towards you need to find someone who's got that big personality to come in and be the face of the program again, and really be out front, and really be someone who supercharges the program a little bit, because I think the fan base needs it.
Yeah, and you look at it, I mean, you said, Nate Oates probably isn't someone that's a viable candidate for Louisville because of the financials. You look at an Ohio State or a Michigan, if that opens, maybe that's a little bit different for Nate Oates
Yeah.
for those two, because those two schools can pony up the money that Alabama can, to where it brings up an interesting situation to where traditionally Louisville's a better job than Michigan, Ohio State. Michigan, Ohio State are good jobs, probably
Yeah,
like
they're
top.
very good
Yeah, they're
jobs.
very good
Top
jobs, like
15
top.
probably.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. Kind of top 15 jobs. Like Louisville, probably top 6, 8, 10 ish. Like it's just kind of one level above Michigan, Ohio State. But I think the great leveling of the field is the financial situations. Michigan, Ohio State have the Big Ten money. They don't have. If Louisville ends up firing Kenny Payne, that's $47.9 million in buyout money you're paying in the last 8 years. That's a lot of money. And the ACC contract isn't as big as the Big Ten. Just not even to mention the fact that Michigan and Ohio State are two of the biggest public universities in the country,
Massive
and
athletics
have
departments.
massive athletic department, massive alumni bases, and yes, they're predominantly football schools, but they're not too happy. I mean, the fact that Ohio State's pulling the trigger on Chris Holtmann on Valentine's Day, like they're
there's no
trying to
love
win in
lost there, is
basketball.
there?
Yeah,
No.
there really isn't, but that's showing like they're serious about trying to hire a dude to bring them back to relevancy. Two programs that Michigan under John Beilein was a phenomenal program. Made a couple Final Fours, obviously had the title game of Louisville in 2013. Ohio State made, the back-to-back Final Fours with Mike Conley and Greg Oden. They hadn't been as consistently up there as Michigan was under Beilein, but still a really traditionally good program, to where all things equal, even though Louisville's the better job on paper, I'd probably put Louisville behind Ohio State, and if Michigan opens, Michigan in the pecking order. And that's not something we're used to seeing. When the Louisville job's open, it's usually the biggest job on the market because it's really hard to find another job that would be as good. I do think, and you can just say this is the Indiana guy talking, but I do think Indiana would probably be the top job if it opened up, just because it's very similar traditionally tier-wise to Louisville, but they have closer to the financials that Ohio State and Michigan have, and they're obviously as committed to basketball as Louisville is on that standpoint, to where I think that might push them a little bit ahead of those two, but just pushing them again to the side, Ohio State, Michigan, I think might be ahead of Louisville at this point if both those jobs were to open.
Yeah, it just depends. Like if they're both vying for someone with a, an 8-figure buyout, maybe that changes the complexity of the situation. But for all of the conversation about money stuff, I still think Louisville, if it really came down to it, they can afford who they want to go get. I know that they're paying a lot of money for a lot of different guys, and I still think Josh Hurd probably doesn't get enough credit for negotiating the buyout of Chris Mack's contract down to what he did, because he was owed quite a bit more. But I don't know, man. I still think Louisville has the ability to go get somebody. Now, the challenge I think that you're throwing in there also is, you're starting to lose touch with a generation of young basketball players. And that's where I think, that's probably the biggest reason why I would make a coaching change. Is you're talking about kids who are, 16 right now, who are, coming up through the ranks of college basketball. They were 4 or 5 years old when Louisville was one of the best teams in the country. They had the years with Donovan Mitchell in the immediate aftermath of that, and Terry Rozier and those guys. So maybe there's a little bit more in touch, but you're running the risk here of, really not having a team that has had a ton of success in recent years to have that name value. And, the resources are there. the conference needs to get better. The ACC really is in a tough spot right now in the last couple years. But you've got the resources. You sure as heck got the arena. And the arena is a big selling point when it's full and all that stuff. So I do think that that is a big, big, big part of this for Louisville. But you've got to go figure out a way to get to strike while the iron's hot and get back into the national picture quickly. So that's kind of why I think you want to go with someone who's got a little bit of that juice and that swagger. So yeah, it's going to be interesting, Jack, because there's all these names. I don't know if you've read Jeff Borzello's look at the Ohio State job yet, but I think it came out the day before we recorded this. But you're seeing names like McDermott from Creighton. You're seeing Miller at Xavier.
Yep. Lamont Paris has been out
Lamont
there.
Paris is going to be a hot
Ohio
name.
native.
Yeah. So there's some interesting names, and I don't know. I don't know how many of those names will overlap with what a Louisville would be looking at. I think Ohio State and Michigan probably would be looking at closer candidate pools. And maybe, there's guys like Jerome Tang that I think are exciting for Louisville fans, but I just, it's such an interesting market because it really feels like the last few years, the big fish, the Scott Drews, these really
Mark
huge
Few
names.
for the longest time.
Yeah. These really huge names, Tony Bennett, like it just doesn't seem like those guys are going anywhere. In which case, what's the next tier down from that? And it just isn't the same list that it used to be. There was a run, and you mentioned Archie Miller, but there was that run where it was Archie Miller, it was Chris Mack.
Shaka Smart.
Yeah, Shaka Smart. Chris Holtmann was in that group.
Sean Miller,
all these
going
young
a little bit
coaches.
back.
Yeah. And so you had all these young up and coming coaches who now have finalized where they're going or have found places that they are or have failed and gone back to a lower level of a job. And it's just created a really interesting market. So I'm fascinated to see what Louisville thinks they can swing at and see where that goes from those initial swings.
There's one name that we haven't mentioned yet that I know has been incredibly divisive amongst fans, and I'll go and give my thoughts on it for you, Jeff. But the whole Chris Beard thought, very big personality, has won a lot of games at some very hard places to win in Texas Tech, and this year has already made Ole Miss at least a competent team, and obviously was at Texas before everything happened. But kind of the big question of, would Louisville hire a guy like that? Trying to balance the moral compass of he's going to win games, but has checkered past, to where it's a little bit different than Bruce Pearl taking a Tennessee kid to a barbecue, or Will Wade making Javante Smart a strong ass offer. And I've been very like Johnny Two Sides on it, because I'm like, again, if you want me to make the decision, give me Josh Hurd's paycheck and I'll tell you what decision I would go with. But do you think Louisville would go for a guy like a Chris Beard that has done so much winning and has the big personality that would fit the Louisville job well, but has the allegations of, the things that got him fired from the Texas job and has him at Ole Miss now? Do you think Louisville would take a view of, we can't hire this guy because of that? Or would they say short-term bad PR would be outweighed by the potential of him potentially winning a lot of games and going deep in the NCAA tournament?
I am only speaking for myself on this.
Fair.
I have not had a conversation with Josh Hurd in a while. Not for any negative reason. I just haven't talked to him in a while. Something that I think is a factor in all of this that people need to consider is that a coaching hire is not done in a vacuum, and it is certainly not done just by an AD. Tom George, as an example, the guy was a unicorn. There are not very many ADs who essentially ran a university to the level that he did and was able to make hires that otherwise most ADs probably would not have been able to make. And so we'll save that conversation, whether that's a good or a bad thing, for a whole other day. I know he is revered by a lot of Louisville fans. But Josh Hurd is not making this hire just by Josh Hurd. He's got to answer to some university folks and some larger institutional side things. So it's my perception. Somehow my TV in my hotel room just turned on. I'm sorry about that, but I'm not even sitting near the remote. I don't even know how that happened. Sorry, that's bizarre. I'm going to turn it off as soon as I give you my thought on this. But look, personally, if I'm an athletics director, I can't hire Chris Beard. I just can't, especially if I'm the AD at Louisville. I think Louisville has, for better or worse, dealt with some real stuff. Some of it not its own doing. I mean, you're not going to blame Louisville for Dino Gaudio and his behavior, but I can't make that hire. I can't make that hire. That's not to say, I know there's all these back and forths and people have disputed allegations and blah, blah. You can't make that hire. You just can't if you're Louisville. So I just, for me, it's not even a discussion. I just don't, it's not a possibility.
That's fair. I just think it's impossible to do this coaching search with the amount
With the
been.
Remote. Keep talking. I'll
but
come back.
It's so perfect that this happens while we're talking about freaking Chris Beard of all things. But
it's an all-time podcast moment.
I mean, we're talking about Chris Beard and serious allegations stuff, and that's when the TV remote pops on. It's incredible. It's you can't script that. But to me, I feel like there's just been so much talk about it that we can't talk about the coaching search and not bring it up. Like for me, it's a moral dilemma. It's an absolute moral dilemma because for right or for wrong, and I would honestly say usually for wrong, a lot of times in sports, and I'm not just U of L, but anything, whether it be the NFL, Major League Baseball, basketball, any sport you want to look at, we very much push the morals aside if the player is good enough or if the coach is good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's good or bad for us as a society. I just think it's a fact at this point. So I don't know if Louisville would do the same thing. Obviously, it's a very unique situation, as with all the scandals and stuff that you mentioned. But the question to me is, would Louisville be, I think the correct word is desperate enough to do that if they feel like he's the best guy and he's the dude that they could get if they weren't able to get someone like Musselman or Tang or Dusty May, so on and so forth. I think it is just worth saying and mentioning and needing to bring up because I think, it's whether you want it to happen or not, it's a part of this coaching search at this point until we
look, I don't think, yes, I agree with all that. And I don't think that the bona fides, the coaching bona fides, and there are significant coaching bona fides with Chris Beard. He's a good basketball coach. I don't think that there is enough of a separation between him and some of the other people we've talked about, who are all at different stages in their career, to say this guy, aside, if you cast aside a pretty big thing to cast aside, is a slam dunk resume compared to everyone else. It's
a very similar resume to, yes. I mean, like Chris Beard's been to a national title game in an Elite Eight. Eric Musselman's been to 2 Elite Eights and a Sweet 16. Jerome Tang in 1 year's been to an Elite Eight. Nate Oates has been a #1 overall seed, been to multiple Sweet 16s. Mick Cronin's been to a Final Four, and other than this year, has had 2 decades of being a damn good head coach, of winning a lot of ball games and getting to the NCAA tournament.
Dusty May, I still like. I don't know if Dusty May is the right fit for Louisville. I don't know Dusty May. I've never talked to him. I've read one story about him, and I've watched FAU play quite a bit in the tournament and towards the end of last year and into this year when they were really, really good. But Dusty May, I lived in South Florida for 3 years. I lived in West Palm. I lived in Palm Beach County, where FAU is, for 3 years.
What happened to the tan?
I never had one to start with, my man. I was white as a hotel wall then, and
I'm right there with you.
Yeah, it's not great. I cannot tan. But anyone taking Florida Atlantic to a Final Four has something going right for them. And the fact is look, I know people, this has been disappointing this year, and they were preseason top 10. They're still like 18-5, which I think it's like, guys, let's check ourselves here. We're talking about FAU. Now they've invested in their university the last decade. They've spent some money. They've had a lot of change and growth there, but that is a tough place to win. And Dusty May took them to the Final Four. Jerome Tang is in the toughest conference, I think, during the regular season to win in. And they had a great first year. Now it's been a little bit more challenging in the second year.
Squarely on the bubble this year.
Squarely on the bubble, but they play their butts off in that league. And so, you start to look at these younger guys, and I mean younger in their coaching careers. They're not necessarily younger by age. And you have to look at the context in which their teams are succeeding. And that just makes it a very interesting conversation. And Jack, I want to throw one more thing at you because I'm interested for your thoughts on it. We're talking about all these guys, and a lot of them are not having great seasons. There isn't hey, this team's going to be a 1 seed like Chris Mack. It's going to be a 1 seed, and then at the end of the year, he's leaving on a high, and you're getting the hot coach. They're really, you mentioned Mick Cronin. They're like 13-12. They've really clicked on the last couple weeks, and they've really started to win some games. But Musselman is struggling at Arkansas. You talk about Tang is a bubble team this year with Kansas State. Dusty May's team has, again, they had preseason top 10 expectations put on them. They're still very much going to be a tournament team and probably a higher seed, but not to the level that they were last year. And so you just keep going down the list of these guys who are good candidates, who just are not having these huge years, which is why even a Sean Miller is not having a great year.
He's not, they're not an NCAA tournament team this year.
Which is why, McDermott at Creighton might be an intriguing guy. But yeah, you just keep going down the list, and these guys aren't having huge years. And so I think that makes for a really interesting conversation around making a hire. You're just not going to be able to roll the Final Four clips and the conference championship clips of this guy that you hire in all likelihood, unless there's a rabbit in the hat that Josh Hurd knows about that we don't. And I think that adds an interesting layer to all of this too.
Yeah, a few things on that. Number one, I think you've seen that before, to where, Shaka Smart makes the Final Four in 2011, but he doesn't leave to take the Texas job until 2017. Mm-hmm. You've seen, Chris Beard goes to the national title game. The next year, he's like a 6th seed, and then he goes to the Texas job. To where I think you've seen athletic directors take a much more larger view of things mm-hmm. when it comes to the coach, whereas as the fan and media side, it's very much, well, let's look at what you've done lately and ignore the bigger picture of a lot of things. Like Eric Musselman's been a disaster this year, but again, the previous 3 years he'd gone Sweet 16, Elite 8. Like, which year's the outlier there? This one. Mick Cronin has had 20 years where he's been in the NCAA tournament every year, has made a Final Four. Was it kind of a miraculous miracle run? Yes, but he's been in the second weekend before. He's in the NCAA tournament every year. And I don't think Mick Cronin's the guy Louisville's going to hire, but if they were to go that route, he would at least give you a very solid baseline of you're going to be an NCAA tournament team more often than not, which would be very refreshing for Louisville at this stage. And you can keep going on and on down the line. Jerome Tang's a little bit different. He's only been a head coach for 2 years, but a lot of these dudes, it's you take the larger sample size and not just, and even with Louisville, you take the larger sample size of 2 years of Kenny Payne and not just what's happened the last 4 games. It tells a much, much different story than just the what's happened in the last couple weeks theory. Mm-hmm. Number 2, I think it's a very good thing for Louisville, to be honest, to not just have the shoe-in one-off dude that's going to kind of be the head coach, because they've had that the last 2 times with Kenny Payne and Chris Mack, and we've seen how that's turned out. Yeah, I think I think it's very refreshing. I mean, even on the football side, it's been Jeff Brom both times. Yeah, and they only got him once. I think it'll be a nice change of pace and very refreshing for Louisville to actually go through an actual coaching search and be able to look at a lot of different candidates and let Josh Hurd and the search firm that everyone will eventually end up hating. It's just inevitable. It's going to happen because it always happens.
Gotta have the search
But
firm. Sorry,
yeah, I mean, you gotta
guys.
have a search. Yeah,
They gotta
but
do, somebody's gotta do the vetting for you.
yeah, but the search firm, Josh Hurd, the board of trustees, whoever else gets involved, they get to actually go through candidates and do actual interviews, give lots of people chances, and be able to have their own opinion formed instead of just being handcuffed by the fan base and former players to hire Kenny Payne or Christy Max from Louisville. You got to hire him, but
Yeah.
but I think it'll be a nice change of pace for Louisville to be able to actually go and get the guy that the department wants to hire. Not saying they didn't want to hire Kenny Payne or Chris Mack, but something that isn't a foregone, set in stone conclusion and just becomes a formality that we've been talking about for the last 3 months.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the other
No, I
two.
agree.